Every word you speak gives someone ammunition. Every vulnerability you expose creates a potential weapon. Every time you reveal more than necessary, you hand over a piece of your power to someone who may not deserve it. This sounds harsh, perhaps even paranoid, until you look honestly at your own experience. How many times have you shared something personal only to have it used against you later? How many times have you opened up completely only to watch someone lose interest or respect? How many times have you explained yourself thoroughly only to be misunderstood anyway? Machiavelli understood something that our therapy-obsessed, oversharing culture has forgotten. Revelation is not connection. Transparency is not trust. And the person who tells everything has given away the only currency that truly matters: mystery, autonomy, and the power that comes from being unknowable. We've been taught that sharing is healing, that vulnerability is strength, that we must expose our inner worlds to anyone who asks. But what if this is exactly what keeps us powerless? Look around at the world we've built. Social media has turned self-disclosure into currency. We perform our vulnerabilities for likes and shares. We document our struggles in real time. We turn our private pain into public content, believing that exposure equals authenticity and authenticity equals worth. We've created a culture where the person who shares least is viewed with suspicion, where privacy is treated as having something to hide, where the reserved person is called cold and the selective person is called fake. But Machiavelli would have seen through this immediately. He would have recognized it as a mechanism of control, a way to keep people exposed, vulnerable, manageable. Because the person who has revealed everything has nothing left to negotiate with. The person who has shared all their weaknesses has armed their enemies. The person who has disclosed every thought and feeling has made themselves predictable, and predictable people are powerless people. This is where our exploration begins, in the dangerous territory between the modern demand for total transparency and the ancient wisdom of strategic concealment. Between what we've been told makes us authentic and what actually preserves our power. Between the performance of vulnerability and the reality of self-protection. Because there's a difference between genuine intimacy and compulsive disclosure, between thoughtful sharing and desperate oversharing, between connection and exhibition. The problem isn't that sharing is always wrong, it's that we've lost the ability to discern when to reveal and when to conceal. We've been taught that more is always better, that holding back is dishonest, that selective disclosure is manipulation. And so we spill ourselves indiscriminately, telling our stories to anyone who will listen, exposing our wounds to people who haven't earned the right to see them, offering up our inner lives for judgment by those who have no stake in our well-being. And then we wonder why we feel so empty. Why connection feels hollow despite all the sharing. Why we feel more alone after posting our vulnerabilities online than we did before. Why the more we reveal, the less seen we actually feel. The answer is simple but brutal. You've confused performance with presence, exposure with intimacy, revealing with relating. You've given away your story so many times that it's lost its meaning. You've shared yourself so freely that you've become common, ordinary, forgettable. Machiavelli wrote The Prince as a manual for maintaining power in a world of competing interests, but his most profound insights weren't about armies or alliances. They were about human psychology. He understood that power comes not from what people know about you, but from what they don't know. That influence comes not from explaining yourself, but from remaining partially obscure. That respect comes not from full disclosure, but from selective revelation. The leader who shows everything loses command. The person who hides nothing has nothing left to intrigue. This isn't about becoming deceptive or dishonest. It's about understanding that you are not obligated to explain yourself to everyone. That your inner life is not public property. That some things are meant to be kept close, protected, revealed only to those who have proven themselves worthy of the gift. Because that's what revelation is, a gift. Not a requirement, not something to be scattered carelessly, not something to be performed for strangers who have invested nothing in your life. Jung would have understood this from a different angle. He spoke about the persona, the mask we wear in public, and he saw it not as deception but as necessary boundary. The persona protects the vulnerable inner self from a world that isn't always safe. The problem isn't having a persona, it's when the persona becomes the only self you know, when you've revealed so much that there's no private self left to protect. The modern demand for total transparency asks you to destroy this boundary, to collapse the distance between inner and outer, to make everything visible and available. But what happens to a person who has no inner sanctuary? Who has shared every thought, every feeling, every experience? Who has made their entire inner life available for public consumption and judgment? They become hollow. They lose touch with themselves because there's no private place left where they can simply be, without performance, without explanation, without the pressure of an audience. They've given so much away that they no longer know what belongs to them. This is the trap of our moment. We're told that withholding anything makes us inauthentic, that privacy means we're hiding something shameful, that the healthiest people are completely transparent. But Machiavelli knew better. He knew that the person who reveals everything is the person most easily manipulated, most readily controlled, most vulnerable to attack. Because once you know someone completely, they cease to be interesting. Once you've seen all their cards, they have no leverage. Once they've told you everything, you can predict and therefore manage them. And this is why power and revelation move in opposite directions. The more you share, the less powerful you become. Not because sharing is inherently weak, but because power requires mystery, requires the other person not quite knowing where you stand or what you'll do next, requires maintaining something held back that keeps you unpredictable and therefore impossible to fully control. The moment you become completely knowable, you become completely manageable. Think about the people in your life who command genuine respect. They're not the ones who constantly explain themselves, who share every thought and feeling, who make themselves completely transparent. They're the people with depth, with reserves you can sense but not fully access, with inner lives that remain partially hidden even as they connect genuinely. They give you enough to know them, but not so much that you can claim to understand them completely. And that mystery, that sense of depths unexplored, is part of what makes them powerful. Now think about the people you've lost respect for. Often they're the ones who overshare, who tell you more than you wanted to know, who have no filter between thought and speech, who make their entire inner world your responsibility to manage. Not because they're bad people, but because they've given away too much too freely. They've revealed without reciprocation. They've exposed without earning trust first. They've made themselves so completely known that there's nothing left to discover, no reason to lean in, no motivation to invest further. So what drives this compulsion to reveal? Why do we over-explain, overshare, expose ourselves to people who haven't earned access to our inner lives? The answer lies in something deeper than social media culture or modern values. It lies in a fundamental wound that most people carry, the belief that they must prove their worth, must justify their existence, must constantly explain themselves to deserve acceptance and love. This wound usually forms early. Maybe you grew up in a family where your thoughts and feelings were constantly questioned, where you learned that simply stating a preference wasn't enough. You had to defend it, justify it, make a case for why you felt the way you felt. Maybe you were taught that privacy was the same as having something to hide, that a closed door meant rejection, that keeping anything to yourself was selfish or suspicious. Maybe you learned that love was conditional on transparency, that you had to earn acceptance by exposing everything, by proving you had nothing to hide. And so you developed a pattern. When someone questions you, you launch into detailed explanations. When someone seems distant, you overshare to create false intimacy. When you feel uncertain about how someone perceives you, you reveal more and more, hoping that if they just knew everything, they would finally understand and accept you. But it never works that way. The more you explain, the less they respect you. The more you share, the less interested they become. The more you expose, the more vulnerable you are to judgment and manipulation. Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've learned are unacceptable and must be explained away. The impulse to constantly justify ourselves comes from the shadow's fear that we're not enough as we are, that our choices need external validation, that we must defend our right to exist as we do. Every time you over-explain, you're letting the shadow run the show. Every time you share more than the situation requires, you're acting from the wounded place that believes your worth must be earned through disclosure. But here's what Machiavelli understood and Jung would have agreed with. The shadow's strategy doesn't work. Explaining doesn't create understanding, it invites judgment. Oversharing doesn't create intimacy, it creates burden. Revealing everything doesn't make you more lovable, it makes you more predictable and therefore less interesting. The approval you're seeking through disclosure will never come, because the people who require you to constantly explain yourself are the people who will never be satisfied with any explanation. This is where most people get trapped in a cycle. They share something personal hoping for connection or validation. The response is lukewarm or dismissive. So they share more, thinking maybe they didn't reveal enough. Maybe if they just explain better or expose more, the other person will finally understand. But each new revelation just gives the other person more information to use, more material to judge, more reasons to feel burdened by your need for validation. And so the respect diminishes, the power shifts, and you end up feeling more alone than if you'd said nothing at all. Nietzsche saw this pattern in what he called slave morality, the tendency to constantly justify yourself to others, to seek their approval, to measure your worth by their standards. He contrasted this with master morality, the ability to determine your own values, to act from your own center, to need no explanation or justification beyond your own judgment. The slave constantly explains because they don't trust their own authority. The master simply is, requiring no external validation for their choices. And this is where the work gets real. Because to stop over-revealing, you first have to confront why you do it. You have to look at the fear beneath the compulsion. The fear that if you don't explain, people will think poorly of you. The fear that if you don't share everything, you'll be alone. The fear that your inner life isn't valuable unless it's witnessed and validated by others. These fears are real, but they're not true. There's a difference. The fear is real because you feel it, but it's not true because the opposite of what it tells you is actually what happens. When you stop over-explaining, people don't think less of you, they respect you more. When you stop oversharing, you don't become more alone. You create space for genuine connection based on mutual investment rather than one-sided disclosure. When you keep your inner life more private, it doesn't become less valuable. It becomes more precious because you're no longer giving it away to anyone who asks. But making this shift requires you to sit with discomfort, to feel the anxiety that comes from not explaining yourself when every instinct screams to justify. To tolerate the uncertainty of not knowing whether someone understands you or approves of you. To trust that you're enough without constant disclosure and validation. This is hard work. It requires you to develop what Machiavelli would have called inner fortitude, the strength to stand alone in your own judgment, requiring nothing from others except what they freely choose to give. The descent into this work is lonely. Because you're confronting how much of your life has been lived in explanation mode, how much energy you've spent trying to make people understand you, how many words you've wasted on people who were never really listening anyway. And there's grief in recognizing this. Grief for all the intimate details you shared with people who didn't deserve them. Grief for all the times you explained yourself to people who used your words against you. Grief for all the vulnerability you performed that was never met with real reciprocity. But in that grief is also liberation. Because once you see the pattern clearly, you can choose differently. You can start treating your inner life as the valuable thing it is. Not something to be scattered carelessly, but something to be shared selectively with people who have proven they can handle it with care. You can start recognizing that not every question deserves an answer, not every situation requires your full disclosure, not every relationship needs access to every part of you. This is where Machiavelli's wisdom transforms from tactic to truth. Strategic concealment isn't about being dishonest, it's about being discerning. It's about understanding that some things are meant to be private, that your thoughts don't need to be public, that your feelings don't require an audience. It's about recognizing that the person who knows when to speak and when to stay silent has more power than the person who tells everything. And here's what's remarkable. When you stop oversharing, when you become more selective about what you reveal and to whom, people start leaning in instead of pulling back. They become curious instead of burdened. They respect your boundaries instead of trampling them. Not because you're playing games, but because you're finally treating yourself with the respect that invites others to do the same. You're no longer desperate for their understanding, no longer performing vulnerability for their approval, no longer explaining yourself into powerlessness. Machiavelli's actual principle can be stated plainly. Concealment is power, and revelation is vulnerability. But understanding this intellectually is different from living it practically. Because in every interaction, you face a choice about how much to reveal. And making that choice wisely requires developing what Machiavelli called prudence, the ability to read situations accurately and respond appropriately rather than reactively. In The Prince, Machiavelli observed that successful rulers never revealed their full intentions, never showed all their cards, never made themselves completely predictable. They maintained an element of mystery that kept allies uncertain enough to remain loyal and enemies uncertain enough to hesitate. This wasn't cruelty, it was strategy. They understood that the moment you become fully known, you become fully manageable. The moment people can predict your every response, they can manipulate your every reaction. This applies far beyond politics. In relationships, the person who reveals everything too quickly, all their past hurts, all their insecurities, all their hopes and fears, often finds themselves abandoned or taken for granted. Not because what they revealed was shameful, but because they gave away too much too soon. They created intimacy without the foundation of trust that genuine intimacy requires. They offered vulnerability without reciprocity. They made themselves completely known before the other person had invested enough to value what they were being given. In professional settings, the person who shares every detail of their personal life, every struggle they're facing, every doubt they have about their capabilities, this person rarely commands respect or advancement. Not because vulnerability is inherently unprofessional, but because undiscerning revelation signals poor judgment. It suggests someone who can't read situations, who doesn't understand boundaries, who will burden others with information they didn't ask for and can't use constructively. In friendships, the person who overshares constantly, who turns every conversation into a therapy session, who needs to process every feeling out loud, this person often finds their relationships becoming one-sided. Friends start avoiding them, not out of cruelty but out of self-preservation. Because they've made the relationship about their needs, their stories, their emotional processing, without recognizing that connection requires reciprocity and that some burdens are meant for professionals, not friends. The application of Machiavelli's principle, then, is about developing discernment. About learning to ask yourself before you speak, is this person entitled to this information? Have they earned access to this part of me? Will sharing this serve me or simply satisfy my compulsion to explain? Is this revelation building genuine connection or just making me feel temporarily less anxious? Am I sharing from strength or from fear? These questions aren't about becoming cold or withholding, they're about becoming selective. About understanding that your story is valuable and shouldn't be given away to anyone who happens to ask. About recognizing that some things are meant to be private, not because they're shameful, but because they're sacred. About learning that the people who truly deserve access to your inner life will prove it through their actions over time, not demand it immediately through their questions. The ethical question always arises here. Isn't this manipulative? Isn't concealment the same as lying? And this is where Machiavelli's wisdom requires careful interpretation. Because there's a vast difference between strategic privacy and deliberate deception. Privacy is choosing not to reveal everything. Deception is actively misrepresenting what is. Privacy is maintaining boundaries. Deception is creating false ones. Privacy protects yourself. Deception harms others. The Stoics understood this distinction. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the importance of being truthful while also being discerning about what truths to share and when. He didn't advocate lying, but he also didn't advocate spilling every thought and feeling to everyone around him. He understood that some things are meant to be kept in counsel, that not every truth needs to be spoken, that discretion is a virtue alongside honesty. Jung approached it from a psychological angle. He spoke about the necessity of the persona, the face we show the world, as a protective mechanism. We're not meant to expose our vulnerable inner selves to everyone we encounter. That's not authenticity, that's poor boundaries. The healthy person can differentiate between their public self and their private self, can choose what to reveal and what to protect, can be genuine without being completely transparent. This is where Machiavelli's principle becomes not just strategy but wisdom. Because learning to hold some things back, learning to let silence do work that words can't, learning to be comfortable with being partially unknown, this isn't about being fake. It's about being whole. It's about having an inner life that belongs to you, that doesn't need constant external validation, that exists independent of whether anyone else understands or approves. And when you develop this capacity, something shifts in how you move through the world. You stop feeling compelled to fill every silence with explanation. You stop offering unsolicited details about your life to people who haven't asked. You stop performing vulnerability for strangers on the internet, hoping it will make you feel less alone. You start recognizing that the deep connections you actually want can only happen when both people are whole in themselves, when vulnerability is mutual and earned, when revelation is gift rather than compulsion. The historical examples of this principle are everywhere. The leaders who maintained power longest were those who kept their own counsel, who didn't expose their thinking process to everyone, who maintained a certain inscrutability that commanded respect. The artists who remained fascinating were those who didn't explain every work, who let the work speak for itself, who maintained mystery around their creative process and personal lives. Consider the difference between someone like Cary Grant, who maintained an aura of sophisticated mystery throughout his career and remained iconic, and the modern celebrity who documents every meal, every thought, every moment on social media and becomes forgettable within years. The difference isn't talent or even likability. It's that one understood the power of concealment while the other mistakes exposure for connection. Or think about the most respected people you know personally. They're probably not the ones who tell you everything. They're the ones who listen more than they speak, who share selectively, who have depth you can sense but never fully access. They give you enough to know them, but not so much that you take them for granted. And that restraint, that selectivity, is part of what makes them powerful and respected. Machiavelli's secret, then, isn't really a secret at all. It's an observation about human nature that remains true across centuries and cultures. People value what they have to work for. They respect what isn't freely given. They're intrigued by what remains partially hidden. And they dismiss what's too easily obtained. Your thoughts, your feelings, your story, your inner world. These are the most valuable things you have. Treating them as such, being selective about who gets access to them, isn't manipulation. It's self-respect. The transformation from compulsive revealer to discerning sharer doesn't happen overnight. It requires you to catch yourself in the moment when you're about to over-explain, when you're about to share more than necessary, when you're about to perform vulnerability for someone who hasn't earned it. And in that moment, you have to choose differently. You have to close your mouth, sit with the discomfort, and trust that you're enough without the explanation. So where does this leave you now, aware of how much you've been giving away? You've seen the pattern, the compulsive explaining, the oversharing, the constant disclosure to people who haven't proven they can handle what you're giving them. And you've felt the cost, the respect lost, the power diminished, the emptiness that comes from performing your inner life for others rather than living it for yourself. Now comes the rebuilding. Now comes the practice of reclaiming what you've scattered. The first step is developing what Machiavelli would call discretion, the ability to discern what to share and what to hold back. This doesn't mean becoming secretive or dishonest. It means asking yourself before you speak, does this person need to know this? Have they earned access to this information? Will sharing this serve my interests or just satisfy my compulsion to explain? These questions aren't cold or calculating, they're self-respecting. They're about treating your inner life as valuable rather than as free content for anyone who asks. Start noticing your patterns. When do you over-explain? Usually when you feel judged, when you're anxious about how you're being perceived, when you're trying to control how someone thinks about you. But here's the paradox. The more you explain, the more you invite judgment. The more you try to control their perception, the less control you actually have. Because you've given them all the information they need to judge you, and you've also shown them that their opinion matters enough to you that you'll scramble to manage it. What if instead, when someone questioned your choice or seemed to disapprove, you simply didn't explain? What if you let their judgment hang in the air, unmet by your defense? What if you trusted that your choice needs no justification beyond your having made it? At first, this feels impossible. The anxiety spikes. The urge to explain becomes almost physical. But if you can sit with that discomfort, if you can let the silence do its work, something remarkable happens. The other person either accepts your boundary and respects you more, or they reveal themselves as someone who never deserved your explanation anyway. This is where Jung's shadow work becomes practical. The part of you that compulsively explains is the part that never learned it was enough just as it is. The part that overshares is the part that's still seeking the acceptance it didn't get early in life. The part that performs vulnerability is the part that confused exposure with intimacy. These parts need compassion, not judgment. But they also need to be integrated rather than allowed to run your life. Integration means acknowledging the fear while choosing differently. It means saying to yourself, I see that I'm anxious about what they think. I notice I want to explain myself, and I'm choosing not to. I'm choosing to trust that I'm enough without their understanding or approval. This isn't repression, it's conscious choice. It's feeling the impulse and not acting on it. It's creating space between stimulus and response, between their judgment and your reaction. Nietzsche wrote about this as the will to power over oneself, the ability to direct your own actions rather than being driven by compulsion or fear. And he saw clearly that most people never develop this. They remain reactive, controlled by their need for approval, slaves to the opinions of others. The transformation he advocated, becoming who you are, requires you to stop living in explanation mode, to stop seeking permission for your existence, to stop performing your inner life for others. And this is where the real power emerges. Not power over others, but power that comes from no longer being controllable through judgment or disapproval. When you stop needing people to understand you, you become immune to their attempts to make you explain yourself. When you stop performing vulnerability, you're no longer burdened by the exhaustion of maintaining that performance. When you keep your inner life more private, you create a sanctuary that can't be invaded by others' opinions. The practical application is simple but requires daily practice. Start small. Next time someone asks you a question that feels invasive, practice saying, "I'd rather not get into that," without explanation. Notice the discomfort. Sit with it. See that nothing terrible happens. Next time you feel the urge to overshare on social media, pause. Ask yourself what you're seeking: connection, validation, relief from loneliness. Then find a healthier way to meet that need. Call a trusted friend. Write in a private journal. Sit with yourself without needing an audience. Notice which relationships improve when you share less. Often it's the healthier ones, the people who respect boundaries, who don't require your constant disclosure, who can handle uncertainty and privacy. And notice which relationships become strained. Often these are the people who were benefiting from your over-revealing. People who got to know everything about you while sharing little themselves. People who used your disclosures against you. People who kept you explaining and justifying because it kept you manageable. This process of becoming more selective about what you reveal will cost you some relationships. And that's how you know it's working. Because relationships built on your constant disclosure, your compulsive explaining, your performed vulnerability, these weren't real relationships anyway. They were dynamics where you played a role, where you exhausted yourself trying to be understood, where you gave far more than you received. Letting these go isn't loss, it's liberation. What remains, what deepens, are the relationships where you're valued not for how much you reveal but for who you are. Where vulnerability is mutual rather than one-sided. Where there's reciprocity in disclosure rather than you always being the one who shares. Where your privacy is respected rather than challenged. These are the relationships worth having, and they only become possible when you stop scattering yourself indiscriminately. The person you become through this process isn't cold or withholding, they're boundaried and self-possessed. They know that their story is valuable and shouldn't be given to anyone who asks. They understand that some things are meant to be private, not because they're shameful, but because they're sacred. They've learned that the deepest connections happen not through total transparency, but through selective, earned, mutual revelation over time. Machiavelli's secret,